Imagine God asked you to sacrifice what you love most. Could you obey? Today, we're diving into a story that challenges us to the core. A story of unwavering faith, unimaginable obedience, and divine provision. This is the story of Abraham and his ultimate test. Let's start with Abraham's life before this test. Abraham was a man who had already walked a long path of faith. God had called him out of his homeland, away from his family and everything familiar, promising him that he would become the father of a great nation. Through this covenant, Abraham's journey of trust in God began. He'd seen God's faithfulness in so many ways, from guidance on his travels to blessings and promises of a future legacy. Abraham knew what it meant to follow God, but he was about to face a test that would take his faith to unimaginable depths. One day, Abraham received a call that would shake him to his core. God spoke to him and gave him a command that seemed impossible to understand. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. Imagine the weight of these words. Isaac was not just Abraham's beloved son. He was the promised child through whom God had said Abraham's descendants would come. Yet here was God, asking Abraham to sacrifice the very son who held the future of that promise. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us that Abraham resisted or argued. But let's pause for a moment and consider the internal conflict he must have felt. As a father, his love for Isaac would have run deep. And as a man of faith, he would have wrestled with the purpose behind this command. Was this truly what God wanted? Why would God ask for such a thing? There's no record of Abraham questioning God, but it's only human to imagine the turmoil within. A swirl of fear, sorrow, and confusion. Yet, despite all this, Abraham chose to obey, even though he didn't understand why. In moments of overwhelming uncertainty, Abraham didn't need to look far for guidance. His mentor was the very God who had walked with him throughout his journey, providing promises, protection, and provision. Every past encounter with God, every fulfilled promise, served as a reminder of God's faithfulness. This relationship was Abraham's anchor. He had learned to trust that God's ways were higher than his own, and this trust would be his guiding light as he moved forward, even when the path seemed impossibly dark. With a heart full of faith and a mind clouded by uncertainty, Abraham set out on the journey to Moriah. He took Isaac, 2 of his servants, and the wood for the burnt offering. For 3 days they traveled, each step a step deeper into obedience, away from the comforts of certainty and into the unknown. This was Abraham crossing the threshold, fully committed to God's command, leaving behind any possibility of turning back. He was now on a path that would test his faith like never before. As they continued their journey, Abraham faced moments that would test his resolve. The first test came from within, as he grappled with the silent pain in his heart. But an external test came when Isaac, his beloved son, asked an innocent question. "Father, where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Imagine the weight of those words. Abraham knew what was to come, yet he replied with quiet faith, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." These words reflected not only his love for Isaac, but also his unshaken trust in God's provision, even in this moment of deepest sorrow and confusion. Finally, they reached the mountain, the place where Abraham's faith would be put to the ultimate test. Abraham built the altar, carefully arranged the wood, and bound Isaac, his precious son, laying him upon the altar. Each movement was a declaration of his obedience, his faith in a God who had never failed him. This was the moment before the climax, the point of no return. Abraham was as close to his breaking point as any human could be, yet he pressed forward, trusting that somehow God would remain true to his promise. The moment had arrived. With a steady hand, Abraham lifted the knife, prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. This was the climax, the point where Abraham's faith faced its greatest trial. In this agonizing moment, Abraham was prepared to surrender his most precious gift to God, trusting fully in God's wisdom and purpose, even if he didn't understand it. This was more than a test of obedience. It was a profound act of faith, a willingness to give up everything for the God he loved and trusted. Just as Abraham was about to bring down the knife, a voice from heaven called out, "Abraham! Abraham!" The angel of the Lord intervened, saying, "Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." At that moment, Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. God had provided a substitute, a sacrificial lamb in place of Isaac. This was the reward. Not only was Isaac spared, but Abraham's faith was affirmed, and God's provision was revealed in a way that would echo throughout history. With Isaac beside him, Abraham descended from the mountain, forever changed by what had just taken place. His faith had been tested and proven genuine. The journey down must have felt surreal, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe at God's mercy. Abraham had walked through a valley of profound sacrifice and had emerged with his faith strengthened and his son by his side. The path back was a reminder that while the trial was over, the lessons and faith gained would remain with him for the rest of his life. Abraham's journey had brought him to a new understanding, a spiritual resurrection of sorts. He had seen God's faithfulness and provision in the most unlikely of places. This experience transformed him, deepening his relationship with God and renewing his faith in God's promises. Abraham emerged from this test with a renewed spirit, carrying with him a testimony of faith that would inspire generations to come. He had proven, through his actions, that nothing was too precious to surrender to God, and in return, he received God's assurance that his trust was well placed. Abraham returned home not just as a father, but as a man with a renewed understanding of God's faithfulness. The elixir he brought back was a profound lesson about obedience and trust. His experience on the mountain became a testament that God's plans are higher than our own, that his provision is sure, even when we don't see it immediately. This story of Abraham's test of faith would go on to be shared, showing generations that true faith is willing to surrender everything to God, knowing that his ways are perfect. Abraham's story challenges us to examine our own lives. Are we willing to trust God completely, even when we don't understand his plan? What might he be calling you to surrender or step out in faith for? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if this story of faith has inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content that dives deep into the truths of the Bible. Let's journey together in learning to trust God more fully every day.